The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle scope and checked her watch. It was 0630 hours, and the silence felt wrong. Too quiet for a region known for constant enemy activity. Maria had been with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 4 years. At 27, she was one of only a handful of women who had earned their place among these elite soldiers. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly under her helmet, and her brown eyes scanned the landscape with the precision of someone who had learned to spot danger before it spotted her. "Movement at 2 o'clock," whispered Corporal Jake Mitchell, lying prone beside her. The young soldier from Texas had been part of her team for 8 months. His hands were steady, but Maria could hear the slight tension in his voice. Maria shifted her position carefully, avoiding any sudden movements that might give away their location. Through her scope, she could see what had caught Jake's attention. 3 figures moving between the rocks about 400 meters away. They wore traditional Afghan clothing, but something about their movement patterns seemed off. "Those aren't civilians," she murmured into her radio. "Bravo team, this is Santos. We have possible hostiles moving southeast of Checkpoint Alpha." The response crackled through her earpiece. "Copy that, Santos. Maintain observation. Do not engage unless fired upon." Behind them, the rest of her 8-man reconnaissance team was spread out in a defensive formation. They had been inserted into this mountain region 12 hours ago with a simple mission: gather intelligence on enemy supply routes and report back. Nothing complicated. Nothing that should have required heavy combat. Sergeant First Class David Park, the team leader, crawled up beside Maria. Park was a veteran with 3 deployments under his belt. His Korean-American heritage had earned him the nickname Soul among the team, though everyone respected him too much to use it during operations. "What do you think?" Park asked, studying the distant figures through his own binoculars. "Scouts," Maria replied without hesitation. "They're checking if the route is clear. My guess is we're about to have company." Park nodded grimly. He had learned to trust Maria's instincts over the past year. She had an uncanny ability to read terrain and enemy movement that had saved their lives more than once. The 3 figures disappeared behind a cluster of boulders. For several minutes, nothing moved in the valley below. Then, Maria's radio crackled with an urgent message from their base. "Bravo team, be advised. Drone surveillance has identified a large enemy force moving toward your position. Estimate 20 to 30 hostiles. Extraction is being arranged, but you need to hold position for at least 2 hours." Maria felt her stomach tighten. 2 hours was a long time when facing those kinds of odds. She looked back at her teammates. Besides Park and Mitchell, there was Specialist Tommy Rodriguez, a medic from California whose steady hands had patched up more bullet wounds than he cared to remember. Private First Class Kevin Walsh, barely 20 years old, carried the team's heavy machine gun with the enthusiasm of someone who still believed war was an adventure. Corporal Lisa Chun handled communications and had the kind of technical skills that could make broken radios work with nothing but determination and spare wire. Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, their demolitions expert, came from a long line of military family and approached every mission with the methodical precision his father had taught him. Finally, there was Specialist Andre Williams, their best marksman aside from Maria, whose calm demeanor under fire had earned him the respect of every soldier he served with. "Listen up," Park said, gathering the team. "We've got at least 20 hostiles heading our way. Command needs us to hold this position for 2 hours before extraction arrives. We're going to set up a defensive perimeter using these rocks as cover." The terrain worked in their favor. They were positioned on a small plateau with good visibility in all directions. Large boulders provided natural cover, and the rocky ground would make it difficult for vehicles to approach. "Chun, get on the radio and give command our exact coordinates. Make sure they know where we are when the cavalry arrives," Park ordered. "Thompson, I want you to identify choke points where we can channel their advance. Williams and Santos, find elevated positions for overwatch." Maria nodded and began moving toward a cluster of rocks that would give her a clear field of fire across the valley. As she climbed, she thought about her daughter back home in Colorado. Emma was only 6 years old and still didn't fully understand why Mommy had to go away for such long periods. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. She had joined the military to provide a better life for Emma, but every deployment meant months away from the little girl who meant everything to her. Letters and video calls helped, but they couldn't replace bedtime stories or helping with homework. Position set, she reported, settling behind a boulder that provided excellent concealment while giving her multiple shooting lanes. Williams found a spot about 50 meters to her left, creating overlapping fields of fire. Below them, the rest of the team worked quickly to prepare their defenses. The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes later. Maria spotted movement in 3 different locations simultaneously. The enemy was approaching from multiple directions, using the terrain expertly to mask their advance. "Park, I've got movement north, northeast, and east," she reported calmly. "They're trying to surround us." "Copy. Everyone hold position until they're in effective range." Maria controlled her breathing and settled her crosshairs on the nearest threat. A man in dark clothing was moving between rocks about 300 meters away, carrying what appeared to be an AK-47. She could take the shot, but revealing their positions too early might compromise the entire team. The enemy fighters continued their approach, clearly confident in their superior numbers. Maria counted at least 15 visible targets, which meant more were likely hidden from view. These weren't amateur insurgents. Their movement patterns and coordination suggested professional training. "Incoming," Williams shouted. The crack of rifle fire echoed across the rocky landscape. Maria saw muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions. The enemy had opened fire simultaneously from multiple angles, exactly what she had feared. "Return fire," Park commanded. Maria squeezed her trigger smoothly. Her bullet found its target, dropping the fighter she had been tracking. Around her, the distinct sounds of American weapons joined the firefight. The M4 carbines had a different pitch than the enemy AK-47s, creating a deadly symphony that echoed off the mountain walls. "Contact east," Rodriguez called out, treating a flesh wound on Walsh's arm while returning fire with his sidearm. The enemy had achieved what they wanted. The Rangers were pinned down, taking fire from multiple directions with limited room to maneuver. Maria shifted position carefully, looking for new targets while trying to identify the enemy's command structure. That's when she saw the first muzzle flash from an elevated position about 600 meters away. A sniper. Then, another flash from a different angle. And another. "Snipers," she called into her radio. Multiple elevated positions. The situation had just become much more dangerous. Enemy snipers could pick off her teammates one by one while keeping them pinned down for the advancing fighters. Maria's mind raced through their options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now facing precision fire from trained marksmen. "I count at least 4 sniper positions," Williams reported grimly. Maria adjusted her scope and began systematically scanning the high ground. Through the thermal imaging attachment, she could see the heat signatures of enemy fighters moving to surround their position. But the snipers were well concealed, using natural cover and probably ghillie suits to blend into the rocky terrain. The first sniper bullet struck the rock inches from Thompson's head, sending stone fragments flying. The demolitions expert cursed and rolled to better cover. "They've got our range," Park said into his radio. "All teams maintain cover and watch for muzzle flashes." Maria spotted movement on a ridge about 500 meters northwest. A brief glimpse of someone repositioning. She held her breath and waited. Patience was everything in counter-sniper work. Rush the shot and miss, and you've given away your position for nothing. Another muzzle flash lit up from the same area. This time Maria was ready. She squeezed her trigger smoothly, following through with her shot. Through her scope, she saw the distant figure slump forward. "One down," she reported. But her success came at a cost. The other snipers had now identified her position from her muzzle flash. Bullets began striking the rocks around her with increasing accuracy. "Santos, you need to move," Park shouted. Maria was already moving, low-crawling to a new position about 20 meters away. As she moved, she could hear bullets striking the rocks where she had been seconds before. The enemy snipers were good. Very good. The firefight continued for another 30 minutes. The Rangers held their ground, but ammunition was becoming a concern. Each man carried enough for a normal reconnaissance mission, not an extended battle against superior numbers. "Ammunition check," Park called out. The responses weren't encouraging. Most of the team was down to their final magazines. Maria had 4 bullets left in her current magazine and 2 full magazines remaining. "I've got maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire left," Rodriguez reported while bandaging another wound on Walsh. The young machine gunner had taken shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade that had struck nearby. He was still conscious and fighting, but Maria could see blood seeping through the hastily applied bandages. "Chun, what's the word on extraction?" Park asked. 40 minutes out at minimum," came the reply. "Weather's slowing down the helicopters." 40 minutes might as well have been 40 hours. At their current rate of ammunition consumption, they would be down to sidearms within 15 minutes. After that, it would be hand-to-hand combat with overwhelming numbers. Maria studied the tactical situation. 7 enemy snipers remained active, based on the muzzle flashes she had observed. They were positioned in a rough semicircle on the high ground, effectively pinning down the entire Ranger team. Meanwhile, at least 20 enemy fighters were advancing through the rocks below, using the covering fire to get within effective range. The solution came to her suddenly, born from years of training and an intuitive understanding of mountain warfare tactics. The enemy snipers were focused on keeping her team pinned down. They weren't expecting a single soldier to leave the defensive perimeter and hunt them individually. It was insane. It was dangerous. It might be their only chance. "Park," she called into her radio. "I have an idea." "I'm listening." "The snipers are keeping us pinned while their ground forces advance. If I can take out those snipers, our guys can maneuver against the ground forces. Santos, there are at least 7 of them in elevated positions. You'd be completely exposed. Not if I use the dead ground between the ridges. I can get within effective range without being seen." Park was quiet for several seconds, weighing their options. Maria could almost hear him calculating odds and considering alternatives. Finally, his voice crackled through her earpiece. "Negative, Santos. Too risky. Sir, with respect, we're going to be overrun in less than 30 minutes if something doesn't change. This is our best option." Another rocket-propelled grenade exploded nearby, showering the team with rock fragments. Williams cried out as shrapnel caught him in the shoulder. 2 wounded, Rodriguez reported. "I need to get them stabilized." Maria made her decision. Sometimes leadership meant making choices others couldn't or wouldn't make. She had been trained for this moment her entire military career. "Park, I'm moving in 2 minutes. Have everyone concentrate fire on the eastern approach to cover my movement." "Santos, that's a direct order to hold position." Maria was already stripping unnecessary gear from her kit. She would need to move fast and light. Extra ammunition, water, her secondary weapon, and emergency medical supplies. Everything else stayed behind. "Tell Emma I love her if this goes sideways," she said into her radio. Before Park could respond, Maria was moving. She slid down the back slope of their position, using a fold in the terrain that would keep her hidden from the sniper positions. Behind her, she could hear the increased volume of fire as her teammates followed her request to provide covering fire. The first phase of her plan required reaching a gully that ran roughly parallel to the enemy sniper line. From there, she could use the natural terrain to approach each position without being seen by the others. It was basic infantry tactics scaled up to an almost impossible level. As she moved through the rocky terrain, Maria's mind was completely focused on the task ahead. Each step had to be calculated. Each movement had to be precise. One mistake would mean death, not just for her, but potentially for her entire team. The sound of gunfire faded slightly as she put distance between herself and the main firefight. Now she could hear individual weapons more clearly. The sharp crack of sniper rifles, the chatter of automatic weapons, the occasional explosion of grenades. Her teammates were holding their ground, but Maria knew it was only a matter of time. The enemy had too many advantages: superior numbers, elevated positions, and the luxury of time. They could afford to be patient while the Rangers burned through their limited ammunition. Maria reached the gully and paused to catch her breath. Through her scope, she could see the first sniper position clearly. A man in a ghillie suit was positioned behind a large boulder about 200 meters away. He was focused on the main firefight below, completely unaware that death was approaching from his flank. She checked her weapon one more time. Every piece of equipment was exactly where it should be. Her rifle was zeroed perfectly. Her scope was clear. Her breathing was controlled. This was what she had trained for during thousands of hours on rifle ranges and in combat simulations. This was why the army had invested so much time and resources in making her the best marksman she could become. Maria settled into a stable shooting position and placed her crosshairs on the first target. At this range, with no wind and perfect visibility, it should be an easy shot. But easy shots could still go wrong if you rushed them or let emotion interfere with technique. She controlled her breathing and waited for the natural respiratory pause. Her finger applied steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding rocks. Through her scope, Maria watched the enemy sniper slump forward. 1 down, 6 to go. Now the real challenge began. The other snipers would have heard the shot and would be looking for its source. Maria had perhaps 30 seconds before they started systematically searching for her position. She was already moving, using the gully to approach the second position from an unexpected angle. Speed was everything now. She had sacrificed surprise for the first kill. The remaining snipers would be alert and actively hunting for her. The second position was more challenging. The sniper was positioned on a small ledge with excellent visibility in all directions. Maria would have to time her approach perfectly, using the few seconds when he was focused on targets below. She waited behind cover, watching the enemy sniper's pattern. Every 20 seconds, he would scan left for potential threats, then return to engaging targets in the valley. During that brief window when he was looking away, Maria would have to cover 40 meters of open ground and make an accurate shot. The mathematics of survival had rarely been so precisely calculated. 20 seconds to move 40 meters and set up for a shot that had to be perfect on the first try. Miss, and he would turn his rifle on her at point-blank range. Maria counted down the seconds, then sprinted across the open ground. Her boots found purchase on the rocky surface as she covered the distance in 12 seconds. 8 seconds to settle into position, acquire the target, and fire. Her second shot was even more precise than the first. The enemy sniper never knew what hit him. 2 down, 5 to go. But now the remaining snipers were fully alert and actively searching for her. The element of surprise was completely gone. From here on, it would be a deadly game of cat and mouse among the rocky peaks, with Maria as both predator and prey. The third sniper position was the most dangerous yet. It offered commanding views of the entire area, including the routes Maria needed to use to approach the remaining positions. She would have to find a way to eliminate this threat without exposing herself to the others. As she studied the tactical situation, Maria could hear the firefight. Maria's fingers found purchase on the rough rock face as she inched along the narrow ledge. 15 feet below the third sniper's position, the cliff dropped away into a deadly fall that would end everything. Her rifle was slung across her back, and every movement had to be calculated with perfect precision. The enemy sniper above was completely focused on the firefight below. Through the gaps in the rock, Maria could see him adjusting his scope and taking careful aim at her teammates. She counted his shots, 1 every 30 seconds, methodical and professional. Each bullet meant one of her team members was diving for cover or potentially getting hit. The ledge was barely 6 inches wide in some places. Maria's military boots had good grip, but the rock surface was weathered and unpredictable. 1 loose stone, 1 moment of imbalance, and the mission would be over. She could hear Rodriguez calling for covering fire over the radio. Walsh's machine gun had gone silent, which meant either ammunition problems or the young soldier was down. The thought drove Maria forward despite the danger. 15 minutes into her climb, she reached a point directly below the sniper's position. Now came the most dangerous part. She had to climb straight up the cliff face for 15 feet while the enemy fighter was actively shooting. Any noise would bring his attention downward, and at this range, even a sidearm would be deadly. Maria studied the rock face above her. There were enough handholds, but the route would take her past a gap where she would be visible if the sniper looked down. Timing would be everything. She waited for his next shot, then began climbing immediately after hearing the rifle crack. The sound would mask any small noises she made, and his attention would be focused on acquiring his next target. Hand over hand, Maria pulled herself up the cliff face. Her arms burned from the effort, and Sweat made her grip uncertain despite the cool mountain air. Halfway up, a piece of loose rock broke away under her foot. She pressed herself against the cliff face and held her breath, waiting to see if the sniper had noticed. Above her, the enemy fighter continued his methodical shooting. No change in pattern. He hadn't heard the falling stone over the general noise of the firefight. Maria completed her climb and found herself on a small ledge behind the sniper's position. The enemy fighter was lying prone about 10 feet away, completely focused on targets below. His rifle was a Dragunov SVD, the same weapon she had trained against in combat simulations. She unslung her rifle with infinite care. At this range, she could have used her sidearm, but the rifle offered better stopping power and accuracy. There would be no second chance if the first shot failed to immediately neutralize the target. The enemy sniper was wearing body armor, which meant a center mass shot might not be instantly effective. Maria aimed for the base of his skull, where the brainstem connected to the spinal cord. It was a smaller target, but it guaranteed instant incapacitation. She controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed off the cliff face, and the enemy sniper slumped forward without a sound. 3 down, 4 to go. But Maria's position had been compromised by the muzzle flash. Within seconds, bullets began striking the rocks around her as the remaining snipers triangulated her location. She rolled away from the cliff edge and found cover behind a boulder. Santos, report. Park's voice crackled through her earpiece. 3 targets eliminated. Taking fire from remaining positions. Give me 60 seconds. Copy. We're down to final magazines down here. Maria checked her own ammunition. 6 rounds in her current magazine, plus 2 full magazines remaining. She had to make every shot count from here on. The 4th sniper position was located on a ridge about 300 meters away. Direct approach was impossible with the remaining enemy fighters actively hunting for her. But Maria had noticed something during her initial reconnaissance that might offer an opportunity. A small ravine cut through the ridge system, creating a natural approach route that would keep her below the sight lines of the elevated positions. The ravine led to within 50 meters of the 4th sniper, close enough for a guaranteed shot, but requiring her to cross open ground at the end. Maria began moving through the ravine, using the cover it provided while advancing toward her next target. The rocky walls muffled sound and hid her movement, but they also limited her visibility. She was essentially moving blind, trusting that the terrain analysis she had done earlier was accurate. Halfway through the ravine, she heard voices above her. Enemy fighters speaking in Pashto, coordinating their search for the American sniper who had been picking off their marksman. Maria understood enough of the language to realize they were systematically checking every possible hiding place. She pressed herself against the ravine wall and waited for the voices to fade. Discovery now would mean facing multiple enemies in close quarters with limited room to maneuver. Not impossible odds, but not favorable ones either. The voices moved away, and Maria continued her advance. The ravine began to shallow out as she approached the ridge where the 4th sniper was positioned. Soon she would have to leave its protection and cross open ground. She paused at the edge of cover and studied the target area through her scope. The enemy sniper was positioned behind a cluster of rocks that provided excellent concealment from below, but left him exposed from the side. If Maria could reach a small depression about 30 meters away, she would have a clear shot. The challenge was crossing those 30 meters without being seen by any of the remaining snipers. Maria studied the terrain carefully, looking for any fold or shadow that might provide concealment during her movement. A cloud passed over the sun, creating a brief period of reduced visibility. Maria took advantage of the moment and sprinted across the open ground, diving into the depression just as the sunlight returned. No shots followed her movement. She had made it undetected. From her new position, the 4th sniper was clearly visible through her scope. He was scanning the valley below, looking for targets among her teammates. Maria could see the muzzle of his rifle swinging slowly from left to right as he searched for Americans to kill. This shot was longer than the previous 3, requiring her to account for bullet drop and the slight crosswind that had picked up during the afternoon. Maria adjusted her scope settings and calculated the corrections needed. The enemy sniper paused in his scanning, apparently having spotted something interesting below. This was Maria's chance. While he was focused and stationary, she had the best opportunity for an accurate shot. Her fourth shot of the day struck the target center mass. Through her scope, Maria saw the enemy fighter slump to the side, his rifle clattering down the rocks. 4 down, 3 to go. But now the remaining snipers knew exactly where she was. Bullets began striking around her position with increasing accuracy. Maria rolled out of the depression and began moving immediately. The tactical situation had changed dramatically. With only 3 enemy snipers remaining, their ability to provide overlapping fields of fire was reduced. Maria's teammates below should be able to maneuver more freely, which would help them deal with the advancing ground forces. Park, sniper coverage is degraded. You should have more freedom of movement now. Copy that, Santos. We're repositioning to better defensive positions. How are you doing up there? Maria checked herself quickly. No wounds, though several close calls had left her uniform torn and her equipment scattered. More importantly, she was down to her last full magazine plus the 6 rounds in her current weapon. Still operational. 3 targets remaining. Understood. Extraction is 20 minutes out. 20 minutes was still an eternity in combat time, but it was better than the 40 minutes they had been facing earlier. If Maria could eliminate the remaining snipers quickly, her team might actually survive this encounter. The 5th sniper position was the most challenging yet. Located on the highest peak in the area, it offered commanding views in all directions, but was also the most difficult to approach. Any route to that position would require crossing open ground that was covered by at least one of the remaining enemy marksmen. Maria studied the problem from multiple angles. Direct assault was suicide. Indirect approach would take too long. But there might be a third option that combined elements of both. The peak where the 5th sniper was positioned had a back slope that was invisible from the other sniper locations. If Maria could reach the base of that back slope, she could climb straight up without being observed. The challenge was getting to the base without being seen. She identified a route that would require crossing 2 separate open areas, each covered by different enemy snipers. It would mean perfect timing and a lot of luck, but it was achievable. Maria waited for the right moment. The 6th and 7th snipers were both actively engaged with targets below, their attention focused on the main firefight. She had perhaps 10 seconds when both would be looking away from her intended route. She sprinted across the first open area, diving behind a boulder just as bullets started striking nearby. The enemy marksmen had spotted her movement and were adjusting their aim. Maria had maybe 30 seconds before they could reposition for better shots. The second dash was even more dangerous. 60 meters of open ground with minimal cover and 2 professional snipers actively hunting for her. Maria waited until she heard both enemy rifles fire, then burst from cover during their reload time. Bullets struck the ground inches behind her heels as she reached the base of the back slope. She had made it, but her position was now known to all remaining enemy forces. The element of surprise was completely gone. The climb up the back slope was grueling. The incline was steep, and the rock surface was loose in many places. Maria had to climb quickly to avoid giving the enemy time to reposition, but each hurried movement risked a fall that would send her tumbling back down the mountain. Halfway up the slope, she heard movement above her. The 5th sniper had detected her approach and was repositioning to defend his position. Maria pressed herself against the rock face and listened carefully. Footsteps on stone, the scrape of equipment being moved. Then, silence. Maria resumed climbing, but now she had to assume the enemy sniper was waiting for her at the top. This would no longer be a precision shot from concealment. It would be a face-to-face gunfight at close range. She reached the top of the slope and paused just below the crest. Her rifle was ready, and her mind was focused on the tactical situation. The enemy fighter had the advantage of position and preparation, but Maria had the advantage of training and experience. She listened for any sound that might indicate the sniper's exact location. After 30 seconds of silence, she decided to force the issue. Sometimes the best defense was an aggressive offense. Maria rolled over the crest of the ridge and immediately spotted her target. The enemy sniper was positioned behind a rock formation about 20 meters away, his rifle aimed at the spot where she had appeared. Both fighters saw each other at the same instant. The firefight lasted less than 3 seconds. Both rifles fired simultaneously, the sounds echoing off the surrounding peaks. Maria felt the enemy bullet pass inches from her head as her own shot struck the target center mass. The fifth sniper dropped his weapon and fell backward. His threat ended. 5 down, 2 to go. But Maria's relief was short-lived. From her elevated position, she could see the tactical situation below more clearly than ever before. Her teammates were surrounded by at least 15 enemy ground forces who had used the sniper engagement as cover to get within close range. Park and his team were trapped in a small cluster of rocks with enemy fighters approaching from 3 sides. Their ammunition was clearly exhausted because Maria could see them fighting with sidearms and even knives in some cases. The 2 remaining snipers were positioned to prevent any escape from the trap. Her teammates would be slaughtered within minutes unless something changed dramatically. Maria studied the positions of the last 2 enemy marksmen. They were located on adjacent ridges about 400 meters apart, both focused on preventing her team from breaking out of the encirclement. Neither was paying attention to the high peak where she was now positioned. From her current location, Maria had clear shots at both remaining snipers, but the angles were challenging and the ranges were at the edge of her weapon's effective capability. She would have to make 2 perfect shots in rapid succession before either target could react. She settled into the most stable shooting position possible and began calculating the complex ballistics required for the shots, wind speed, and direction. Bullet drop over 400 meters. The slight angle variations between the 2 targets. Her first target was the sniper who posed the greatest immediate threat to her teammates. He was positioned to fire down into their defensive position and was actively engaging them with precision shots. Maria adjusted her scope for the range and wind conditions, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she watched the bullet impact and saw the target fall. 6 down, 1 to go. But the final enemy sniper had heard the shot and was now actively searching for its source. Maria had perhaps 10 seconds before he located her position and returned fire. She had to make her final shot count. The last target was partially concealed behind cover and moving unpredictably. Maria tracked him through her scope, waiting for the moment when he would present a clear shot. Below, she could hear the intensity of the firefight increasing as her teammates realized the sniper threat was almost eliminated. The enemy marksman paused for 3 seconds to acquire a target below. It was the opportunity Maria needed. Her final shot of the engagement struck the target squarely, ending the sniper threat completely. 7 down, mission accomplished. All sniper positions neutralized, Maria reported into her radio. You should have freedom of movement now. The response was immediate and dramatic. Without the covering fire from elevated positions, the enemy ground forces found themselves exposed and vulnerable. Maria's teammates began moving aggressively, using their superior training and equipment to turn the tables on their attackers. From her elevated position, Maria could provide overwatch and guidance to help coordinate the counterattack. She spotted enemy fighters trying to escape and directed her teammates to intercept them. She identified threats that weren't visible from ground level and warned her team accordingly. Within 10 minutes, the remaining enemy forces were either eliminated or in full retreat. The immediate threat to her team was over, but Maria knew the mission wasn't complete until everyone was safely extracted. Extraction birds are inbound, Chen reported over the radio. Landing zone is secured. Maria began her descent from the peak, carefully retracing her route down the treacherous slopes. Her ammunition was exhausted, her equipment was scattered, and her uniform was torn in a dozen places, but she was alive and her team was safe. As she rejoined her teammates at the extraction point, Maria could see the respect in their eyes. What she had accomplished in the past 2 hours would become legendary within the Ranger community. A single soldier eliminating 7 enemy snipers in close succession while under fire was the kind of feat that careers were built on. But for Maria, the mathematics were simple. Her team had needed someone to turn the fight around, and she had been in position to do it. That was what Rangers did for each other. That was what the training was for. The helicopter extraction went smoothly, with the team safely airborne within minutes of the birds arriving. As they flew away from the mountain battlefield, Maria looked down at the terrain where she had spent the most intense 2 hours of her military career. 7 enemy sniper positions were now silent. Her teammates were alive and heading home. The mission had been successful despite overwhelming odds. Park leaned over and shouted above the helicopter noise. Hell of a job. The helicopter ride back to base took 43 minutes. But for Maria Santos, it felt like both an instant and an eternity. The adrenaline that had sustained her through 2 hours of close-quarters combat was beginning to fade, replaced by the bone-deep exhaustion that came after surviving something that should have killed her. Across from her in the helicopter, Walsh was receiving medical attention from Rodriguez. The young machine gunner had taken shrapnel in his shoulder and arm, but he was conscious and talking. Williams sat beside them, his own shoulder wound bandaged but not serious enough to require immediate evacuation. Park caught Maria's eye and gave her a thumbs up. Even over the helicopter noise, she could read his lips. Outstanding work. Maria nodded back, but found herself thinking about the 7 enemy snipers she had killed over the past 2 hours. Each shot had been necessary to save her teammates, but taking a life was never something to celebrate, even in combat. These had been professional soldiers doing their job, just as she had been doing hers. The helicopter began its descent toward Forward Operating Base Chapman, a dusty collection of prefabricated buildings and defensive positions that served as home for several hundred American military personnel. Maria could see the landing pad approaching and began mentally preparing for what would come next. Debriefings were standard procedure after any combat engagement, but what had happened today would require extensive documentation and analysis. 7 enemy snipers eliminated by a single soldier was the kind of achievement that would be studied in military schools for years to come. As soon as the helicopter touched down, medical personnel were waiting to check on the wounded team members. Walsh and Williams were taken to the base medical facility for proper treatment, while the rest of the team was escorted to a debriefing room where intelligence officers were already waiting. Colonel James Patterson, the base commander, was a graying veteran with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for straight talk. He looked at Maria with a mixture of professional respect and genuine amazement. "Sergeant Santos, I've been hearing some remarkable reports about your actions today. Before we begin the formal debriefing, I want you to know that preliminary battle damage assessment confirms 7 enemy Kia in elevated positions, all attributable to precision rifle fire." Maria remained at attention. "Yes, sir. Mission requirements dictated elimination of sniper threat to enable team maneuver capability." Colonel Patterson nodded. "At ease, Sergeant. Let's sit down and walk through exactly what happened out there." The debriefing took 3 hours. Maria provided a detailed account of every movement, every shot, and every tactical decision she had made during the engagement. Intelligence officers asked specific questions about enemy equipment, tactics, and positioning that would help them understand how such a large force had been able to approach so close to an American position. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the intelligence officer leading the debriefing, was particularly interested in the coordination between the enemy snipers and ground forces. "You observed their movement patterns for over an hour before the engagement began. What was your assessment of their training and organization level?" Maria considered the question carefully. "Professional level training, sir. Their positioning was tactically sound, they used proper overwatch techniques, and their equipment was well maintained. These weren't amateur fighters." "Any indication of foreign training or advisors?" "Negative, sir. But their tactics suggested formal military instruction rather than informal guerrilla experience." The questions continued as military analysts tried to extract every piece of useful intelligence from the engagement. Maria answered each query with the same professional precision she had applied to the mission itself. Finally, Colonel Patterson leaned back in his chair and studied Maria for a moment. "Sergeant Santos, in 26 years of military service, I've never seen anything quite like what you accomplished today. 7 enemy snipers eliminated while under fire, using individual movement techniques that required extraordinary skill and courage." He paused and consulted a folder in front of him. "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. Your actions today saved the lives of 7 American soldiers and turned what could have been a catastrophic defeat into a successful mission." Maria felt a flush of pride, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "No, Sergeant. What you did today went far beyond normal duty requirements. You made tactical decisions and executed maneuvers that will be studied and emulated for years to come. After the debriefing ended, Maria finally had a chance to clean up and eat her first real meal in over 18 hours. The base mess hall served decent food considering the remote location, and she found herself surprisingly hungry despite everything that had happened. Park found her at a corner table and sat down across from her. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course, Sergeant." "How are Walsh and Williams doing?" "Both will make full recoveries. Walsh is already talking about getting back to the team as soon as the doctors clear him." Park took a sip of coffee and studied Maria carefully. "You saved all our lives today. You know that, right?" Maria looked down at her food. "We're a team. That's what teams do." "No, Santos. What you did today was something special. I've been leading Rangers for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Over the next several days, word of Maria's actions spread throughout the base and beyond. Soldiers who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully when they passed her in the corridors. Officers asked her technical questions about long-range shooting and mountain warfare tactics. Most importantly, her own teammates treated her with the quiet respect that came from knowing someone had risked everything to keep them alive. There was no awkwardness or jealousy, just the solid trust that came from shared danger and mutual sacrifice. 3 weeks later, Maria received a video call from her daughter Emma back in Colorado. The 6-year-old's face lit up the computer screen with a gap-toothed smile that made every dangerous moment seem worthwhile. "Mommy, I lost another tooth. The tooth fairy brought me $5. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did you brush the other teeth like I showed you?" "Yes, Mommy. Grandma makes sure I brush them every night." Emma's expression became more serious. "Mommy, when are you coming home?" It was the question Maria dreaded most because she never had a good answer. "Soon, baby. Mommy has a little more work to do here, and then I'll come home for a long visit. Will you help me with my math homework? It's really hard." "Of course I will. I'll help you with all your homework when I get home." They talked for another 15 minutes before the connection became too unstable to continue. As the screen went dark, Maria felt the familiar mixture of love and guilt that every deployed parent experienced. She was serving her country and providing for her daughter's future, but she was also missing precious moments that could never be recovered. The formal award ceremony took place 6 weeks later. Colonel Patterson presented the Silver Star in front of the entire base personnel, reading the citation that described Maria's actions in clinical military language that somehow failed to capture the desperate reality of what had actually happened. For gallantry in action against an armed enemy of the United States while engaged in military operations involving conflict with an opposing armed force, Staff Sergeant Santos distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous conduct in the face of overwhelming odds. As Maria stood at attention listening to the citation, she found herself thinking not about the medal but about the moment she had decided to leave her defensive position and hunt the enemy snipers individually. It had been a calculated risk based on tactical analysis, but it had also been the kind of decision that separated truly exceptional soldiers from merely competent ones. After the ceremony, Maria called home again to share the news with Emma. Her daughter was excited about the idea of a medal, but more interested in when Mommy would be coming home to see it. 2 more weeks, baby. Then, I'll have 30 days to spend with you. Will you teach me how to tie my shoes? I still can't do it right." "Of course I will. We'll practice every day until you're perfect at it." The conversation reminded Maria why she had chosen military service in the first place. Everything she did was ultimately about creating a better world for Emma to grow up in. The mountains of Afghanistan seemed very far away from a 6-year-old struggling with shoelaces, but the connection was real and important. Maria's final 2 weeks in Afghanistan passed quietly. No more dramatic firefights or desperate mountain climbs. Just routine patrol duties and equipment maintenance that allowed her to process everything that had happened and prepare mentally for the transition back to civilian life. Her teammates threw her a small farewell party at the base recreation center. Walsh, back on duty with his arm in a sling, presented her with a custom patch showing a lone sniper silhouette against mountain peaks. The words 7 down were embroidered below the image. "Something to remember us by," he said with a grin. though I don't think you'll need help remembering this deployment. Williams, also recovered from his wounds, raised a toast with non-alcoholic beer. To Santos, who proved that one soldier in the right place can change everything. The toast was echoed by the entire team, but Maria felt uncomfortable with the attention. What she had done was important, but it was also what any professional soldier should do when their teammates were in danger. I just want to say that I couldn't have done any of it without knowing you guys had my back, she responded. Rangers lead the way together, not individually. The flight home took 26 hours with connections through Germany and the East Coast. Maria spent most of the time sleeping, finally, allowing her body to fully relax for the first time in months. When she woke up during the final approach to Denver, she could see the Rocky Mountains in the distance and felt a surge of anticipation. Emma was waiting at the airport with Maria's mother, holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome home, Mommy," in colorful crayon letters. The reunion was everything Maria had dreamed about during the long nights in Afghanistan. Her daughter had grown during the deployment, her face more mature, and her vocabulary expanded. But she still ran into Maria's arms with the same enthusiasm that had sustained them through every separation. "Mommy, you're really here. Grandma said you might not come today because of the weather. Nothing could keep me away from you, baby. Nothing in the whole world." They spent the drive home catching up on 6 months of missed conversations. Emma told her about school, friends, and the loose tooth that had finally come out the week before. Maria listened to every word, storing up these precious moments to carry her through the next deployment. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Maria sat on the back porch of her mother's house and looked up at the clear Colorado sky. The stars seemed brighter than they had in Afghanistan, though she knew that was probably just her imagination. Her mother joined her with 2 cups of coffee and sat down in the adjacent chair. "You look different," she said quietly. "Different how?" "Older. More serious. Like you've seen things that changed you." Maria considered this. It was true that Afghanistan had tested her in ways she had never been tested before. The responsibility of keeping her teammates alive, the split-second decisions under fire, the weight of taking enemy lives to protect American ones. "I learned some things about myself," Maria admitted. "About what I'm capable of when everything is on the line." Her mother nodded. "I'm proud of you. Not just for the medal, but for choosing to serve when most people wouldn't." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the stars and listening to the suburban sounds of dogs barking and cars passing in the distance. Finally, her mother spoke again. "Have you thought about what comes next? Another deployment? A different assignment?" Maria had been avoiding that question, preferring to focus on the present moment of being home with Emma. But it was a decision that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. "The Army wants me to attend the Ranger School instructor course. It would mean staying stateside for at least 2 years, teaching the skills I learned in combat to the next generation of Rangers." "That sounds like a good opportunity." "It is. But it also means taking on more responsibility and probably preparing for an eventual command position. The Army invested a lot in training me, and they want to see a return on that investment." Maria took a sip of coffee and thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. A single mother from a working-class family in Colorado who had joined the military for practical reasons and discovered she had a talent for the most demanding aspects of military service. The Silver Star citation was just a piece of paper, but it represented something more significant. Recognition that exceptional performance under extreme pressure was possible when training, courage, and circumstances combined in the right way. More importantly, it validated her belief that she could provide the kind of life for Emma that she had always wanted her daughter to have. Stability, education, opportunities that would allow her to become anything she wanted to be. The next morning, Emma woke up early and climbed into bed with Maria. "Mommy, will you have to go away again soon?" Maria pulled her daughter close and kissed the top of her head. "Not for a long time, sweetheart. Mommy is going to be home for a while." "Good. I missed you so much." "I missed you too, baby. More than you'll ever know." As they lay together watching the sunrise through the bedroom window, Maria made a silent promise to herself and to Emma. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever missions the Army assigned her, she would always find a way to come home. Because that's what Rangers did. They completed the mission, they took care of their teammates, and they never left anyone behind. The 7 enemy snipers she had eliminated in the mountains of Afghanistan were part of her story now, but they weren't the most important part. The most important part was the little girl sleeping peacefully in her arms, trusting that Mommy would always be there when she needed her. That was a mission Maria Santos intended to complete successfully, no matter what obstacles she might face along the way. Up there, Santos. Maria nodded and checked her rifle one more time. It was clean and ready for the next mission, whenever that might come. Because there would always be a next mission, and Rangers had to be ready for whatever challenges they might face. The debriefing would come later. The paperwork would follow. There might even be medals and commendations. But, for now, Maria was content to watch the Afghan mountains fade into the distance and think about getting home to see Emma. Her daughter would never fully understand what had happened on this remote mountain peak, and Maria hoped she would never have to. But someday Emma would be old enough to appreciate the fact that her mother had been exactly where she needed to be when her teammates needed her most. That was worth more than any medal or commendation the Army could offer. Continuing below, her teammates were still holding their ground, but she could tell from the sound that they were down to their final reserves of ammunition. Time was running out faster than she had hoped. The solution required using the terrain in a way she had never attempted before. A narrow ledge ran along the cliff face about 15 feet below the sniper's position. If she could reach it without being seen, she might be able to climb up behind him. It meant exposing herself to a 100-foot fall if she slipped. It meant making the climb in complete silence while enemy bullets filled the air around her teammates below. But it was the only approach that offered any chance of success. Maria began the dangerous traverse, her fingers finding tiny holds in the rock face that would never show up on any climbing route. This was pure survival climbing, with death waiting for any mistake.